My name is Kurt, and at 32 years old, I thought I had experienced all the rejection life could throw at me. 10 years of failed manuscripts and empty promises in New York had hardened me, but nothing prepared me for returning home. Walking into that family reunion with hope in my heart was my first mistake. The second was believing blood meant loyalty. When my aunt sneered at me across that crowded room, I felt something inside me break and reform into something harder. Before I tell you how my own family betrayed me and what I did about it, let me know where you are watching from. And hit subscribe if you have ever felt the knife of betrayal from those who should have loved you the most. I grew up in Pine Ridge, Wisconsin, one of those picture-perfect small towns that travel magazines love to feature during fall foliage season. Our population barely reached 3,000 people, but what we lacked in numbers we made up for in gossip and family connections. Everyone knew everyone, and more importantly, everyone knew their place in the social hierarchy. My family, the Harrisons, were practically royalty in Pine Ridge. My grandfather had founded the local bank back in the 1950s, and from there the family tree spread its branches into every corner of local influence. We had judges, doctors, lawyers, and business owners all bearing the Harrington name. Success was not just expected, it was demanded. At the top of this social pyramid sat my father's sister, Aunt Patricia. At 58, she had the sharpest mind and coldest heart in the family. After inheriting the largest share of my grandfather's estate, she had doubled the family fortune through shrewd real estate investments and a small venture capital firm that funded local businesses under suffocating terms. Her house on Oakwood Drive was the largest in town, a sprawling 6-bedroom colonial that hosted every major family event. Even as a child, I felt Patricia's critical gaze following me. While my cousins received genuine smiles and affection, I only ever seemed to disappoint her. "You are too sensitive for a boy," she would say when I preferred reading to football. Artists starve Kurt. Remember that she warned when I won a creative writing contest in high school. My father, always eager for his sister's approval, would nervously laugh along. I never understood why Patricia seemed to dislike me so much until years later. Perhaps she saw something in me that threatened the careful order she had established. Or maybe she simply enjoyed having someone to criticize. By 18, I had one goal: escape Pine Ridge. When I received my acceptance letter from Columbia University, I packed my bags within the week. My parents seemed torn between pride in my achievement and worry about my choice of major: English literature. "What kind of job will that get you?" my father had asked. But I was determined to become a writer, to tell stories that would reach beyond our small town boundaries. New York City embraced me with its chaotic energy and endless possibilities. For the first few years, I was too enchanted by my new freedom to worry about Patricia's disapproval or my family's expectations. I threw myself into my studies, graduated with honors, and immediately began work on my first novel while taking odd jobs to pay the rent. Reality, however, has a way of crushing dreams under its heel. By 25, I had completed my manuscript, a coming-of-age story set in a small Midwestern town. The rejections started pouring in. "Not commercial enough. Beautiful writing, but no clear market. We love your voice, but cannot take a risk on this project at this time." I revised, rewrote, and submitted again, and again, and again. Meanwhile, I bounced between jobs: barista, to bookstore clerk, to night shift security guard. My tiny apartment in Bushwick became both sanctuary and prison as my bank account dwindled and my student loans loomed larger. At 30, I hit rock bottom. My third complete manuscript had been rejected by every publisher my agent had approached. She gently suggested I try writing something more commercial or consider a different career path. That same week, I lost my job at the bookstore due to budget cuts and missed my rent payment. I had not spoken to my family much during those years. Pride kept me from admitting my struggles, and their occasional calls always included pointed questions about my publishing deal or when I would get a real job. I had stopped going home for holidays, claiming I was too busy with writing or work opportunities. Then came the call from my younger sister, Samantha, the only family member I still spoke to regularly. "There is a big family reunion next month," she said, her voice hesitant. "Aunt Patricia is hosting it for her 60th birthday. Everyone will be there. Mom and Dad really want you to come." I almost declined immediately, but something stopped me. Maybe it was desperation, or perhaps a naive hope that after 10 years my family might finally see me as an adult with his own path. I also knew that my second cousin Robert had received a startup loan from Patricia last year. With my eviction notice looming, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could convince her to help me too. "I will be there," I told Samantha, already mentally calculating how much of my remaining savings it would take to make the trip. "Really? That is great, Kurt. Everyone will be so surprised to see you." There was something in her tone that should have warned me, but I was too focused on the possibility of financial salvation to notice. I bought a bus ticket back to Wisconsin, telling myself this was not defeat but a strategic retreat. The Greyhound bus that carried me back to Pine Ridge was as worn down as my spirits. The faded blue seats had lost most of their cushioning, and the air conditioning worked sporadically at best. I spent the 14-hour journey staring out the window, watching the urban landscape of New York gradually give way to the rolling farmlands and forests of the Midwest. I had forgotten how green everything was here, how the cornfields stretched to the horizon like an ocean of vegetation. The familiar sights should have been comforting, but instead they filled me with a growing sense of dread. Every mile closer to Pine Ridge felt like rewinding my life, erasing the independence I had fought so hard to establish. The bus pulled into the station at 2 in the afternoon. Pine Ridge had not changed much in 10 years. The same faded storefronts lined Main Street, though I noticed the old hardware store had been replaced by an artisanal coffee shop, a small concession to changing times. I had barely stepped off the bus when I heard someone call my name. It was Mike Donovan, my high school chemistry lab partner, now sporting a receding hairline and the uniform of the local police department. "Kurt Harrington." "No way. Heard you were some big-shot writer in New York now." His words landed like a punch to the gut. "Working on it," I managed to reply, forcing a smile. "How have you been, Mike?" Good. Married Lisa Jenkins, got 3 kids now. Made detective last year." He looked me up and down, taking in my worn jeans and faded t-shirt. "You here for Patricia's big birthday bash?" "Yeah, family reunion time." I shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny. "Well, good to see you back. Temporary visit, right?" There was something in his tone, almost hopeful, that I would confirm I was not staying. "Just a few days," I assured him, and watched as relief flickered across his face. "Great catching up. Gotta run on duty, you know." He was already backing away. Similar encounters followed as I made my way through town. Mrs. Peabody at the drugstore. My old English teacher, Mr. Wilson. The Bradshaw twins, who now ran their father's insurance agency. All conversations followed the same pattern: initial surprise, awkward questions about my non-existent writing career, and a hasty retreat. By the time I reached the Pine Ridge Motel, my confidence was thoroughly shaken. I had chosen the motel over staying with my parents, telling myself it was to maintain independence. But truthfully, I could not bear the thought of the questions, the disappointment in their eyes when they saw what their son had become. The motel room was basic but clean. A double bed with a floral comforter that had seen better days, a dresser with a small television, and a bathroom with temperamental plumbing. At $60 a night, it would quickly eat through my limited funds, but it offered something priceless: privacy. I unpacked my single duffel bag, hanging up the one decent outfit I had brought for the reunion, a navy blue button-down shirt and khaki pants. Not exactly formal attire, but the best I could manage. After a quick shower, I collapsed onto the bed, setting my alarm for 6. The reunion dinner started at 7, and I needed time to prepare myself mentally. When I woke, the sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows across the motel parking lot. I dressed carefully, trying to flatten the wrinkles in my shirt, and studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror. 10 years had added lines around my eyes and a permanent furrow between my brows. I looked tired, older than my 32 years. On the way to Patricia's house, I stopped at the local liquor store and spent 20 of my precious remaining dollars on a bottle of mid-range whiskey, the cheapest gift I could present, without appearing completely destitute. The walk to Oakwood Drive took me through the wealthiest neighborhood in Pine Ridge. Here the houses sat back from the road, protected by manicured lawns and ornamental trees. Some had been built in the last decade, modern monstrosities with 3-car garages and enormous windows. But most were older homes, like Patricia's their age, lending them an air of established permanence. As I approached the end of the street, Patricia's colonial came into view. Even among these impressive homes, it stood apart. White columns framed the entrance, and perfectly trimmed hedges lined the circular driveway where luxury cars were already parked. I recognized my father's Mercedes, my cousin James's BMW, and several other vehicles that screamed financial success. My steps slowed as I approached the house, the gravel driveway crunching under my feet like tiny bones. Music and laughter spilled from the open windows, the sounds of a family celebrating together. For a moment I considered turning around, going back to the motel, and catching the first bus out of town in the morning. Instead, I took a deep breath, climbed the perfectly maintained steps to the front door, and rang the bell. The expensive chimes echoed inside, sealing my fate. The heavy oak door swung open to reveal my sister Samantha, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant updo that made her look more like our mother than the pigtailed girl I remembered. She wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent in New York. Kurt, her voice held genuine surprise, as if she had not really expected me to show up despite our conversation. She stepped forward for a quick, somewhat stiff hug. "You made it." "I said I would," I replied, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. Even my sister, my one ally, had doubted me. "Everyone is in the living room and garden." "Come in." She stepped back, allowing me to enter the marble-floored foyer. I handed her the whiskey bottle, its brown paper bag suddenly seeming shabby and inappropriate. "Just a small gift for Aunt Patricia." Samantha took it with a tight smile. "That is thoughtful. I will put it with the other gifts." Following her through the house was like walking through a museum of family success. The walls were lined with photographs of graduations, weddings, professional achievements, and award ceremonies. I noticed my own face was conspicuously absent from these displays. The living room was packed with relatives, many of whom I barely recognized. Cousins who had been children when I left were now adults, with partners and children of their own. Uncles and aunts had grown grayer, heavier, but their expressions of polite surprise at my appearance remained unchanged from my memories. "Look who is here," Samantha announced, though not loudly enough to command the room's attention. A few heads turned. My father detached himself from a conversation and approached my mother, trailing behind him. "Son." He clasped my hand in a firm handshake rather than embracing me. "Good to see you." "Hi, Dad." "Mom." I leaned in to kiss my mother's cheek. She smelled of the same perfume she had worn throughout my childhood. "You look thin," she said, concern creasing her forehead. "Are you eating properly in New York?" "I manage," I replied, not wanting to admit that proper meals had become a luxury I often skipped. Kurt, my cousin James, approached, champagne flute in hand. His custom suit and gold watch screamed of the success he had found in his father's law firm. The Prodigal Writer returns published any bestsellers yet. The question was delivered with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He knew the answer. "Still working on it," I said, the same response I had given Mike earlier. It was becoming my mantra. Well, persistence is key, right? Though at some point, you have to wonder if you are just banging your head against a wall. He laughed, as if he had made a harmless joke, rather than twisting the knife in my most painful wound. "James just made partner," my father interjected proudly, as if James were his son rather than his nephew. "Congratulations," I managed. "And he and Bethany just bought that beautiful house on Lakeview Drive," my mother added. The conversation continued in this vein as I was passed from relative to relative. Each exchange followed the same pattern: polite greeting, pointed question about my career, thinly veiled disappointment at my answers, and then an enthusiastic update on their own remarkable achievements or those of their children. I made my way to the bar, set up in the corner of the room, and poured myself a generous scotch. As I sipped it, I overheard my cousins, Robert and Thomas, talking just a few feet away. "Cannot believe he actually showed up," Robert muttered, not bothering to lower his voice much. 10 years in New York with nothing to show for it. "Dad says he has been working as a barista or something," Thomas replied with a snicker. "All that education wasted. Guess some people just cannot handle the real world." "Patricia says he has been asking family for money. Probably why he is here." I drained my glass, heat rising to my face. Was that what everyone thought? That I had come back just to beg? The worst part was, they were not entirely wrong, which made the humiliation even more complete. I scanned the room for a friendly face, someone who might offer a conversation that was not an exercise in passive-aggressive comparison. My younger cousin Alice had always been kind, but she was deep in conversation with her husband, their two small children playing at their feet. Uncle George had encouraged my writing once, but he had passed away 3 years ago. As I contemplated a quick escape to the bathroom for a moment of peace, I overheard my Aunt Carol talking to another relative. Patricia has been keeping us all updated on Kurt's situation in New York. Such a shame. So much potential wasted. Apparently he has been working in coffee shops and barely making rent. Patricia tried to help him get a job through her connections, but he was too proud. I froze. That was a lie. Patricia had never offered me any help. In fact, I had barely communicated with her since leaving Pine Ridge. How could she know so much about my situation? And why was she discussing it with the entire family? The pieces began to fall into place. The knowing looks, the prepared questions about my failures, the lack of surprise at my appearance despite my limited communication with most family members. This was not just coincidental cruelty. This was orchestrated. Patricia had been painting a picture of me as the family failure for years, ensuring everyone knew exactly how far I had fallen. "Everyone, dinner is served," Patricia's commanding voice cut through the buzz of conversation. Like a queen addressing her subjects, she stood at the entrance to the dining room, resplendent in an expensive navy blue dress and pearls that had belonged to my grandmother. At 60, Patricia Harrington remained formidable. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her posture impeccable, and her gaze sharp as it swept across the room, cataloging each person present. When her eyes landed on me, a brief flash of something surprise or perhaps irritation crossed her features before her social mask slipped back into place. "Kurt," she said, her voice carrying clearly so that all could hear. "What an unexpected pleasure. I did not think you would be able to leave your busy life in New York to join us." There was an undercurrent of mockery in her words that made several relatives exchange glances. "I would not miss your 60th birthday, Aunt Patricia," I replied, forcing warmth into my voice. "How thoughtful." Her smile was a masterpiece of insincerity. "Well, do come in. We have arranged the seating." The dining room of Patricia's home could accommodate 30 people comfortably. The long mahogany table gleamed under the light of 2 crystal chandeliers, and fine china bearing the Harrington family crest was set at each place. Name cards in elegant calligraphy guided guests to their seats. Mine, I noticed with a sinking feeling, was at the far end of the table, wedged between my 7-year-old second cousin and an elderly great-aunt who was nearly deaf. As far from Patricia, who sat at the head of the table, as physically possible, the first course was served by hired staff, a delicate mushroom soup accompanied by freshly baked rolls. As I raised the silver spoon to my lips, Patricia tapped her crystal water glass with a knife, calling for attention. "Before we enjoy this wonderful meal, I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate not just my birthday, but our remarkable family. Looking around this table, I see so much achievement, so much success." She began to highlight specific family members and their recent accomplishments. James's partnership, Robert's new startup, Samantha's promotion at the hospital, where she worked as an administrator, cousin Jennifer's twins, being accepted to prestigious preschools. On and on she went, a calculated litany of success that conspicuously avoided any mention of me. The main course arrived, perfectly cooked beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables. As the plates were being served, Patricia finally turned her attention to me. "And Kurt, do tell us about your adventures in New York." "Still working on that novel. It has been, what, 10 years now." All conversation ceased. Every eye at the table turned to me. "I have completed 3 manuscripts, actually," I said, keeping my voice level. "Publishing is a difficult industry to break into." Of course, Patricia nodded sympathetically. "And what are you doing for steady employment these days?" "Still at that coffee shop." Heat crept up my neck. "I work at a bookstore now. Part-time." "A bookstore? How appropriate. At least you are around literature." even if you are not producing it. Several relatives chuckled. Kurt has always been dedicated to his dream, my father said in what I think he imagined was a defense. Dreams are important, Patricia agreed. Though at some point, one must wake up to reality. 32. Is it not, Kurt? I nodded stiffly. Well, not everyone can be successful early. Some people are late bloomers. Her tone made it clear she did not think I was going to bloom at all. I focused on cutting my meat into perfectly even pieces, wishing I could disappear through the floor. Kurt was always creative as a child, my mother offered weakly. Yes, I remember his little stories, Patricia said. Such an imagination. Though imagination does not pay the bills, does it? Speaking of which, Kurt, your father mentioned, you might be facing some financial difficulties. The knife in my hand slipped, scraping loudly against the fine china. The table went silent again, all pretense at separate conversations abandoned as the assembled relatives waited for Patricia's kill shot. I have had some setbacks, I admitted, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. But I am managing. Patricia's smile was pure predator. I heard your apartment is being rented to someone else next month. And those student loans must be quite burdensome by now. How could she possibly know about my apartment? I had only received the eviction notice last week and had told no one in the family. We are family, Patricia continued, her voice raised to ensure everyone could hear. There is no shame in admitting when you have failed. Honestly, we didn't think you'd show your face after all your failures. The laughter that erupted around the table cut deeper than any knife. It was not just Patricia now, but nearly everyone. Small chuckles and outright guffaws, faces turned toward me, with expressions ranging from amusement to pity. 10 years and nothing to show for it, Cousin James added. Maybe it is time to come home and get a real job. I am sure Patterson Insurance could use another sales rep, Thomas suggested with fake generosity. Or you could go back to school, Robert offered. Learn a trade. Plumbers make good money these days. Each suggestion was more humiliating than the last, delivered with the same false concern that barely masked their enjoyment of my downfall. In that moment, something inside me went very quiet and very cold. I set down my knife and fork carefully, my appetite gone. As the conversation swirled around me, now freely dissecting my failures without even the pretense of including me, my gaze drifted to the open door of Patricia's home office, adjacent to the dining room. On her desk, partially visible from my seat, was a folder with what looked like correspondence. The letter on top bore the logo of Lakeside Publishing, a small but respected regional publisher based in Milwaukee. I had submitted my second manuscript to them 18 months ago and received a standard rejection letter. But why would Patricia have correspondence from them? As the dessert was being served, an elaborate tiered cake decorated with sugar flowers, I excused myself to use the restroom. No one seemed to notice or care about my departure. Instead of turning toward the guest bathroom, however, I slipped quietly into Patricia's office and closed the door most of the way behind me. The folder was right there on her immaculate desk. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. The first letter, dated nearly 8 years ago, was from Lakeside Publishing to Patricia. Dear Miss Harrington, thank you for bringing your nephew's submission to our attention. While we had initially shown interest in his manuscript, your concerns about the thinly veiled portrayal of Pine Ridge and its prominent families give us pause. As a valued investor in our publishing house, your opinion carries significant weight. My blood turned to ice. Letter after letter revealed a pattern of interference stretching back years. Patricia had systematically contacted publishers, literary agents, and even the small literary magazine where I had occasionally published short stories. Using her financial influence and business connections, she had quietly undermined every opportunity that might have come my way. But why? The answer came in a draft of an email she had printed out, apparently to edit before sending. Kurt's writing, while admittedly skilled, presents a dangerous perspective on small-town life that could encourage more of our young people to abandon their responsibilities for foolish artistic pursuits. Furthermore, his thinly disguised characterizations of prominent Pine Ridge citizens, particularly in his latest manuscript, border on libel. As a significant donor to your organization, I must express my concerns about promoting such work. It was all there in black and white. Patricia had not just been indifferent to my success, she had actively worked against it. She had read my manuscript somehow, perhaps through contacts at the publishers, and recognized that my fiction, while never directly based on Pine Ridge, drew from my experiences there. She saw my potential success as a threat to her carefully constructed social order, a beacon that might inspire others to leave and pursue creative careers, instead of remaining under her influence. In that moment, looking at the evidence of years of deliberate sabotage, I knew exactly whose smile I would be erasing first. I stood in Patricia's office, my hands trembling with rage and shock. The sounds of laughter and conversation from the dining room seemed distant now, as if I was underwater. I needed to think, to plan. Acting on pure emotion would only confirm their view of me as unstable and unsuccessful. Carefully, I used my phone to take photos of the most damning documents. Letters between Patricia and publishers, emails to literary agents, even a note about a phone call to my former landlord in Brooklyn. The breadth of her interference was staggering. She had contacts everywhere, it seemed, and had not hesitated to use them against me. As I replaced the folder exactly as I had found it, another document caught my eye. A thick binder labeled Family Financial Arrangements sat on a shelf behind her desk. Glancing nervously at the partially open door, I quickly grabbed it and began flipping through the pages. What I found was even more shocking than Patricia's interference in my career. The binder contained detailed records of loans made to various family members, all with interest rates that bordered on predatory. My father had borrowed $300,000 to save his insurance agency during the recession. Cousin Robert's startup funding came with terms that gave Patricia 40% ownership. Even Samantha had a loan for her house down payment that required her to pay nearly double the market interest rate. Patricia was not just the family matriarch. She was its banker, using financial leverage to control everyone around her. The notes in the margins were particularly revealing, documenting how she had used these debts to influence family members' major life decisions, from career choices to marriages. I took more photos, working quickly but methodically to capture as much evidence as possible. As I was about to return the binder to its shelf, I noticed a folder labeled Kurt tucked inside. Opening it revealed a dossier on me that Patricia had been maintaining for years. Credit reports, employment history, even printouts of my social media posts, and private emails. How she had obtained those, I could not imagine. The level of surveillance was disturbing, but what truly chilled me was a typed note outlining her concerns about my potential return to Pine Ridge. Kurt remains the most unpredictable element in the family structure. His continued pursuit of writing, despite repeated failures, demonstrates a troubling obstinacy. Should he return to Pine Ridge, steps must be taken to ensure he does not disrupt the carefully maintained family dynamic or influence the younger generation with his impractical ideals. The note continued, detailing potential ways to manage me should I ever return permanently, including strategies to publicly discredit me and limit my employment opportunities in the region. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly replaced the binder, slipping my phone into my pocket. I moved to the small powder room connected to the office, just as the door opened fully. "Kurt, are you in here?" was Samantha. I flushed the toilet and emerged from the powder room. Sorry, the main bathroom was occupied. She looked suspicious but nodded. "Everyone is having coffee and cake." Patricia asked where you had gone. "Of course she did," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Would not want to miss an opportunity to highlight my failures to the assembled family." Samantha's expression softened slightly. "It is not like that, Kurt. Isn't it? You have all been laughing at me all evening. We are concerned, that is all. You have been struggling for so long. And whose fault is that I snapped immediately, regretting it? Now was not the time to reveal what I knew." "What is that supposed to mean?" I forced my features into a more neutral expression. "Nothing. The rejection has been hard to take, that is all." She seemed relieved by this more expected response. "Come have some cake. It will get better, Kurt. Maybe coming home is what you need." I followed her back to the dining room, seeing everything through new eyes. The relatives who I had perceived as cruel were actually victims themselves, trapped in Patricia's web of financial control and manipulation. Their mockery of me was partly jealousy for my escape, however unsuccessful it might have been, and partly performance for Patricia's benefit. As I took my seat again, Patricia's gaze met mine across the table. For a split second, I thought I saw uncertainty in her eyes, as if she sensed something had changed. Then she smiled, cold and confident as ever. "Feeling better, Kurt? You looked quite pale earlier." "Much better, Aunt Patricia," I replied, matching her smile with one of my own. "In fact, I feel like things are suddenly becoming very clear." She raised an eyebrow but turned her attention back to the general conversation. I ate my cake slowly, observing the dynamics around the table with fresh understanding. Uncle David deferred to Patricia on every topic. Cousin Jennifer kept glancing at Patricia nervously when discussing her children's education. My father, once the head of his own business, now checked with his sister before expressing opinions. They were all puppets, and Patricia held the strings. Financial strings, secret strings. Strings of social approval and family acceptance. I had been the only one to escape, and she had made sure I paid a heavy price for that freedom. But now I knew the truth. And knowledge, as they say, is power. I excused myself early, claiming fatigue from travel. As I said my goodbyes, I made a point of being especially warm to those family members I now knew were most firmly under Patricia's thumb. I hugged my parents' promise to stop by their house the next day, and even thanked Patricia for her hospitality. Leaving so soon, she asked her tone, suggesting I was being rude. "I have some work to do tonight," I replied. "Ideas for a new project." Another novel. The mockery was evident in her voice. I smiled, making sure it reached my eyes. Something like that. Something very close to home this time. A flicker of unease crossed her face, but she dismissed it quickly. "Well, good luck with that. Given your track record, you will need it." "Thank you, Aunt Patricia. I have a feeling this one might actually find its audience." As I walked back to my motel through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, my mind was racing with possibilities. I would not confront Patricia directly; that would be too easily dismissed. I needed to be strategic, methodical, just as she had been in her campaign against me. This would not be about revenge, but about truth and liberation, not just for me, but for the entire family. Back in my shabby motel room, I sat at the small desk and opened my laptop. It was time to start writing again, but not fiction this time. This story would be all too real. I spent that entire night in the motel room, organizing the evidence I had gathered and planning my next steps. Sleep was impossible, adrenaline and rage keeping me wide awake as I pored over the photos of Patricia's documents. By dawn, I had outlined a comprehensive strategy that would require patience and careful execution. The first thing I needed was time and a base of operations. My meager savings would not last long at the motel, and I needed to be in Pine Ridge to implement my plan. After a quick shower, I walked to Main Street and entered the Bluebird Cafe, a cozy coffee shop that had replaced the old hardware store. "Help wanted" read a small sign in the window. Perfect timing. The owner, a woman in her 40s named Laura, who had moved to Pine Ridge from Chicago 5 years ago, interviewed me on the spot. My barista experience in New York made me an ideal candidate, and when I mentioned I was Kurt Harrington, her eyebrows rose slightly. Harrington, as in Patricia. Harrington's nephew. The very same, I admitted, wondering if this connection would hurt or help my chances. To my surprise, she smiled. "Well, that is interesting. Patricia tried to block my business permit when I first opened. Said the town did not need another coffee shop competing with her friend's place on Elm Street. I had to appeal to the county board to get approved. I had found an ally, one of the few people in town not afraid of Patricia. Laura hired me on the spot, offering a reasonable hourly wage plus tips and a flexible schedule. We open at 6 and close at 8. You can work morning shifts, which would leave your afternoons and evenings free for your writing." I did not correct her assumption that I would be working on fiction. The writing I planned would be of a very different nature. With employment secured, I next needed to find more affordable accommodation. The Pine Ridge Gazette, our local newspaper, had a classified section online. I found a room for rent in a house owned by an elderly widower named Frank Miller on the edge of town. At $400 a month, it would stretch my budget thin, but was far more sustainable than the motel. When I met Frank to see the room, I discovered another person who held no love for Patricia Harrington. "Your aunt foreclosed on my son's business during the recession," he told me bluntly. "Could have extended the loan by a few months, but she refused. Boy had to move to Milwaukee to find work. Barely see my grandkids now." By the end of that first day, I had secured a job accommodation and confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Patricia had created plenty of enemies in Pine Ridge through her ruthless business practices. I just needed to find them and connect the dots. My next step was to reconnect with certain family members individually, away from Patricia's watchful eye. I started with Samantha, texting her to meet for coffee at the Bluebird during my break. She arrived looking nervous, glancing around as if worried about being seen. "I cannot stay long," she said, settling into a corner table. I told the hospital I had an errand to run. "Thanks for coming," I said, placing a latte in front of her. I wanted to talk without everyone around. "About last night, Kurt, I am sorry if the family came across as harsh. They are worried about you." "Are they worried? Or is Patricia worried?" I asked carefully. Samantha fidgeted with her cup. "What do you mean?" "That loan Patricia gave you for your house. The interest rate seems pretty steep." Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "How do you know about that?" "I know a lot of things now, Sam. About how Patricia has been controlling the family through money and secrets. About how she has interfered in my career specifically." "What are you talking about?" I showed her some of the photos I had taken, watching, as her expression shifted from confusion to shock to anger. "She blacklisted you with publishers. Can she even do that?" "Apparently, when you have money and connections, you can do quite a lot," I said. "And it is not just me. She has been manipulating everyone, including you." Samantha stared at the evidence, her face pale. "My loan. She told me it was the standard rate, that she was doing me a favor when the banks would not approve me for enough. She lied. And I suspect she has been lying about a lot of things to a lot of people." By the time Samantha left, she had agreed to introduce me to other family members who might be receptive to the truth. More importantly, she provided me with her own evidence, forwarding emails where Patricia had advised her against taking a better job in Madison because family should stay close. Over the next few days, I continued working at the cafe, using my free time to meet with more relatives one-on-one. Cousin Robert was initially defensive but crumbled when I showed him the true terms of other family loans compared to his. Uncle David admitted Patricia had threatened to reveal his past gambling problem to his partners if he did not vote her way on family financial decisions. Even my father, when confronted privately, confessed that Patricia had been holding his business loan over his head for years, dictating everything from his political contributions to which employees he could hire or fire. Each conversation yielded more evidence, more connections in the web Patricia had woven. I stored everything securely in encrypted cloud storage, building a comprehensive picture of how one woman had systematically controlled an entire family and influenced a town through financial manipulation, information control, and strategic relationships. While gathering this evidence, I also reached out to my former editor in New York, Diane, who had always believed in my writing but had been unable to get my work past the final acquisition committees. "Kurt," she said when I called, genuine warmth in her voice. "It has been too long. Are you working on something new?" "Something very different," I replied, and proceeded to explain what I had discovered about Patricia's interference. Diane was silent for a long moment after I finished. "That explains a lot, actually. Your second manuscript got unusually far in the process before being killed suddenly. The official reason was marketing concerns, but rumors suggested outside pressure. Would you be willing to go on record about that? Not for attribution necessarily, but to confirm the pattern." "For you, absolutely." "But Kurt, what exactly are you planning to do with all this?" "I am writing an article, Diane, about small-town power structures, financial control, and the hidden cost of crossing the wrong person. Patricia is going to be my case study, but the piece will resonate far beyond Pine Ridge. That sounds more like investigative journalism than fiction. Maybe that is what I should have been writing all along." With Diane's help, I secured interest from The Atlantic for a potential feature. They were intrigued by my pitch, a deeply reported personal essay about how wealthy individuals can control entire communities through seemingly benevolent financial involvement. I would need to provide substantial documentation and multiple sources, but my growing collection of evidence and testimonies would satisfy those requirements. As I built my case against Patricia, I was careful to maintain a low profile around town. I worked my shifts at the cafe, spent evenings in my rented room writing, and acted cordial but distant when I occasionally ran into Patricia or her closest allies. If she was aware of my activities, she showed no sign of concern. Her decades of unchallenged control had made her complacent, unable to imagine that someone she viewed as a failure could possibly threaten her position. By the end of the second week, I had conducted over 20 interviews with family members, local business owners, and town officials who had experienced Patricia's manipulation firsthand. I had documented a pattern of financial control spanning 3 decades, revealing how she had used loans, investments, and charitable donations as leverage to influence everything from town zoning decisions to family members' career choices. The article practically wrote itself. I titled it, "The Spider at the Center: How One Woman's Web of Financial Control Captured a Family and Shaped a Town." The words flowed as they never had in my fiction, fueled by righteous anger but tempered by journalistic rigor. Each accusation was backed by documentation, each example supported by multiple sources. When the draft was complete, I sent it to Diane, who connected me with an editor at The Atlantic. 3 days of intense back and forth followed as they fact-checked every claim and strengthened the structure. The legal team reviewed it carefully, ensuring everything was defensible against potential litigation. Finally, after nearly a month of work, I received the email I had been waiting for, publication date set for the following Monday, with the article to be featured prominently on their website and included in the next print issue. The night before publication, I gathered key family members, those who had provided information and were most trapped in Patricia's web at Frank's house. I showed them the final version of the article and prepared them for the fallout. "Once this goes live, Patricia will know who talked," I warned them. "She will be angry. She will threaten. She might even try to retaliate financially." "Let her try," Robert said with newfound confidence. "I have already refinanced my loan through a proper bank. She has no hold over me anymore." Others had taken similar steps, quietly disentangling themselves from Patricia's financial control over the past few weeks. Samantha had secured a better position at a hospital in Madison. My father had brought in new investors to buy out Patricia's interest in his business. "This will not just affect the family," I cautioned. "The whole town will be talking about it. Patricia's reputation will take a serious hit." "Good," Frank said firmly. "This town has been under her thumb for too long. Maybe now the city council will start making decisions based on what is best for Pine Ridge, not what is best for Patricia Harrington." As I walked back to my rented room that night, I felt strangely calm. Tomorrow would bring chaos, accusations, and likely some burned bridges, but it would also bring truth and hopefully liberation for many who had been silently suffering under Patricia's control. At 6 in the morning, just as I was heading to my shift at the Bluebird Cafe, my phone pinged with the notification I had been waiting for. The article was live. I watched as the first shares and comments began to appear on social media, many from New York literary contacts expressing shock and support. By noon, the story had spread throughout Pine Ridge. Customers at the cafe whispered about it as they ordered their coffees. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members and old acquaintances. Some were supportive, others accusatory, but none were neutral. Patricia Harrington's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, and everyone was choosing sides. Patricia herself did not contact me directly that day, but I heard she had called an emergency family meeting for that evening, excluding me and those who had spoken on the record. It did not matter. The truth was out, and no amount of damage control could stuff it back into the box. The Atlantic article was picked up by several larger publications, each adding their own angle to the story. A reporter from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel called to ask for an interview. A producer from a popular podcast about power dynamics in small communities emailed to discuss a potential episode. 6 months ago, I had been a failed novelist on the verge of eviction. Now I was at the center of a conversation about wealth power and the hidden mechanisms of control that shape communities across America. My voice was finally being heard, just not in the way I had originally imagined. As Laura locked up the cafe that evening, she gave me a knowing smile. "Your aunt came in today after the lunch rush. First time she has ever set foot in here. What did she want? To know how long you had been working here. Whether you had discussed her with me. Laura laughed. I told her customer confidentiality is very important to the Bluebird Cafe and suggested she try our lavender latte. She did not appreciate the recommendation. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. I bet she did not. You know, Kurt, Laura said as we walked out, you might have missed your calling. That article was really something. Have you considered writing more nonfiction? I looked up at the stars appearing in the evening sky, bright and clear, in a way they never were in New York. I am starting to think fiction was just how I processed the world until I was ready to face it directly. There are a lot more stories out there that need telling. Well, Laura replied, you certainly know how to tell them. 6 months passed, in what felt like both an instant and a lifetime. After the publication of my article in The Atlantic, which became one of their most read and shared pieces that year, my life transformed in ways I could never have predicted. The first week after publication was chaotic. Patricia attempted damage control through threats of legal action and a campaign to discredit me among family members who had not been part of my investigation. Her efforts backfired spectacularly when several of those same relatives, emboldened by those who had already spoken out, came forward with their own stories of manipulation and control. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel ran a follow-up piece featuring interviews with local business owners who had been forced out by Patricia's financial maneuvering. A regional business publication investigated her investment firm and found evidence of questionable lending practices that bordered on illegal. The domino effect continued as more people found the courage to speak up. I received offers for freelance writing assignments from several major publications interested in similar stories of power and influence in small-town America. My perspective as both an insider and a journalist gave me unique access to communities and stories that might otherwise remain hidden. 3 months after my article was published, I signed a contract with a major publishing house for a book expanding on the themes of the piece. The advance was modest but sufficient to provide financial stability while I worked on the manuscript. The publisher was particularly interested in exploring how the dynamics I had uncovered in Pine Ridge reflected broader patterns across the country. As for Patricia, the exposure had consequences beyond reputation damage. The scrutiny led to an audit of her investment firm, resulting in fines for regulatory violations. Several family members refinanced their loans through legitimate banks, breaking her financial hold over them. The town council, once firmly in her pocket, began making decisions that occasionally went against her interests. She did not lose everything, of course. Wealth and decades of established power provided significant insulation from complete downfall, but her influence diminished considerably, and many who had once feared her now spoke openly about their relief at being free from her control. My parents struggled with the fallout. My father in particular found it difficult to reconcile his loyalty to his sister with the evidence of her manipulation. But over time, as he experienced the freedom of making business decisions without her approval, our relationship began to heal. He admitted that he had always been proud of my determination, even when he had been too afraid of Patricia's disapproval to say so. 6 months to the day after my article was published, I returned to Patricia's house for another family reunion. This one ostensibly to celebrate my cousin Jennifer's 25th wedding anniversary. The real significance was not lost on anyone, though. This was the first major family gathering since the exposure of Patricia's manipulations, a test of the new family dynamic that had emerged from the ashes of her control. The difference was apparent from the moment I arrived. The event was being held at Patricia's house, still her wealth, ensuring she remained the only family member with space to host such a large gathering. But she was no longer the unquestioned center of attention. Conversations did not halt when she entered a room. People did not seek her approval before expressing opinions or making announcements. I entered with some trepidation, uncertain of my reception despite the supportive messages from many family members. Samantha met me at the door, now commuting from Madison for family events rather than living under Patricia's shadow in Pine Ridge. "You made it," she said, giving me a genuine hug so different from the stiff greeting 6 months earlier. "Would not miss it," I replied. "How are things at the new hospital?" "Amazing. I should have made the move years ago." She lowered her voice. "Patricia is in the living room. She knows you are coming. She has been well subdued today." I nodded, steeling myself for the confrontation. But when I entered the living room, what struck me most was how ordinary Patricia looked. Still elegant, still composed, but somehow smaller, less imposing than the towering figure who had dominated my life for so long. She noticed me immediately, of course. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then, surprising me completely, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement before turning back to her conversation with Uncle David. It was not forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement of the new reality. We would likely never be close, never fully repair what had been broken, but we could exist in the same family space without open hostility. The dinner that followed was remarkably pleasant. I sat near my parents, surrounded by relatives who now treated me with a respect that had been absent at the previous gathering. My recently published book deal was discussed with genuine interest rather than mockery. Several cousins even asked for advice about writing or publishing their own creative interests, no longer hidden for fear of Patricia's disapproval. After dinner, as people broke into smaller groups for conversation, I found myself alone on the patio, enjoying a moment of quiet reflection. The sound of the door opening behind me broke my reverie. "Your article was well written," Patricia said, her voice carefully neutral as she came to stand beside me. Biased and selective in its facts, but well constructed. I turned to look at her, this woman who had cast such a long shadow over my life. "Thank you for the literary criticism. You always had talent," she continued, surprising me. "That was never the issue." "Then what was the issue, Aunt Patricia? Why did you work so hard to ensure I failed?" She considered this for a long moment, staring out at the manicured garden. "People like you are dangerous, Kurt. You see too much, feel too deeply. If you had succeeded, others might have followed. This town needs its young people, its talent. Not everyone can leave. So you appointed yourself the guardian of Pine Ridge, deciding who could pursue their dreams and who needed to stay to serve your vision. Someone has to make the hard choices for the greater good." I shook my head, marveling at her continued self-justification. "That was never your decision to make." "Perhaps not," she conceded, the closest thing to an apology I would ever receive. "But I stand by my intentions, if not all my methods." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our complicated history hanging between us. "What will you do now?" I asked finally. "Adapt as I always have. My influence may be diminished, but it is far from gone. Pine Ridge still needs direction, investment. Just with more transparency and less manipulation, I hope." She gave me a look that was almost respectful. "You have earned the right to your victory lap, Kurt. Enjoy it. But remember, power does not disappear. It merely changes form." With that cryptic warning, she returned inside, leaving me to my thoughts. In the months that followed, I split my time between New York and Pine Ridge, writing my book and continuing to build my new career in journalism. My first novel, ironically, was finally published by a small press that specialized in literary fiction, receiving modest but positive reviews. The protagonist was a young man from a small town who discovers the courage to tell difficult truths, fiction, and reality, blending in a way that felt authentic and earned. The greatest change, however, was not in my professional life, but in my relationship with myself. For years, I had carried the weight of perceived failure, believing that my inability to succeed as a novelist was due to some fundamental lack in my writing or my character. Learning that external forces had actively worked against me was both infuriating and liberating, allowing me to finally recognize the resilience that had kept me going despite the obstacles. I established a small nonprofit in Pine Ridge that provided mentorship and resources for young people interested in creative pursuits, ensuring they would have the support I had lacked. Several family members, freed from Patricia's influence, became enthusiastic participants in the program. Even my father, in a moment that brought tears to my eyes, donated a significant sum, telling me he was proud of what I had built. The truth about Patricia and her methods had not destroyed our family as some had feared. Instead, it had created space for more authentic connections, for relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear and obligation. Some wounds would never fully heal. Some bridges remained burned, but the family that emerged from the ashes of Patricia's control was more genuine, more supportive, and ultimately stronger. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my newly purchased small cottage on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, working on the final chapter of my book, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 10 years of striving and failing in New York. A humiliating return. Home, the shocking discovery of betrayal, and the unexpected finding of my true voice through nonfiction. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led me to a place of peace I had never thought possible. I had learned that success was not about meeting others' expectations or achieving some external benchmark, but about finding the courage to speak your truth, whatever form that might take. As the sun set over the Wisconsin landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I typed the final words of my book. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most afraid of your success. They disguise control as protection, manipulation, as guidance. But when you find your authentic voice, no one can silence you anymore. The journey to that voice may be painful, filled with betrayal and disillusionment, but on the other side lies a freedom that no one can take away, a strength born from surviving the very attempts to break you. In the end, the greatest revenge is not destroying your oppressors, but building something beautiful from the ruins they created. I hope my story has given you something to think about in your own life. Have you ever had someone try to hold you back from your dreams? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family betrayal and finding your true path. Remember, sometimes our greatest strength comes from the very people who tried to break us. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to speak your truth, no matter who tries to silence you.